The rain had not stopped since morning. The streets of Los Angeles looked quieter than usual, as if the city itself had chosen silence for a day. Inside a small corner cafe near Sunset Boulevard, Sandra Bullock sat by the window, tracing circles on her coffee cup with her fingertip. It was her birthday, yet she had told no one. No parties, no calls, no posts. Just quiet. Just her thoughts. She had promised herself this year would be different. No grand plans, no expectations. But deep down, somewhere in that quiet corner of her heart, there was a wish she never said out loud. It wasn't about fame or success or anything the world could give. It was about one person she hadn't seen in years, Keanu Reeves. They had shared so much laughter once, on sets, in long drives, in the silence between takes when no words were needed. But time had its own way of creating distance. They drifted apart, not because of anger, but because of life. She had learned to live with that distance, but it never stopped her from wondering if he ever thought of her, too. As she looked outside the cafe window, she remembered one particular night years ago. It was after a long day of shooting. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically. Everyone had gone home, but he had stayed back. Without saying a word, Keanu had handed her a small paper cup of hot chocolate. No words, no big gesture, just quiet kindness. It was that moment that had stayed with her, a moment that felt pure and unseen by the world. Today, as the rain tapped against the glass, she whispered softly, "Just one more moment like that." That would be enough. Across the city, Keanu was in his modest home, surrounded by books, plants, and the faint sound of an old vinyl record spinning. He had been filming overseas for months, and this was one of his rare days off. He sat by the window sipping tea, lost in a memory. He had read somewhere that it was Sandra's birthday week. He wasn't sure if it was today or tomorrow, but he knew it was close. He thought about sending a message, but something stopped him. It had been years. What if she had moved on? What if reaching out only reopened old chapters she no longer wanted to read? Yet his heart didn't rest. There was a quiet voice inside him that whispered, "Some things shouldn't stay unsaid forever." He opened his drawer, and inside was a small photograph. A candid shot taken years ago during the filming of Speed. She was laughing, head tilted slightly, eyes full of light. It wasn't a professional photo. It was one he had kept without telling anyone. It reminded him of the warmth she carried wherever she went. As he looked at it, he felt something stir inside him. Not nostalgia, not regret, but something softer. Something that said he still cared in ways he couldn't explain. That evening, the rain grew heavier. Sandra closed her umbrella and started walking home. On the way, she stopped near an old bookshop she used to visit often. Something pulled her inside. The air smelled of old paper and coffee. She walked through the aisles aimlessly until a familiar voice broke her thoughts. "Still walking into bookstores when it rains?" She froze. The voice was calm, warm, and instantly recognizable. She turned around slowly, her breath catching in her chest. There he was, Keanu, standing near the doorway, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, rain still glistening on his jacket. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside blurred into soundless motion. It was as if time itself had paused for them. "You remembered," she finally whispered. He smiled softly. "I never forgot." She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. He handed her the flowers gently. "I didn't know if you'd want company," he said quietly. "But I thought maybe today silence could be shared again." Her eyes filled with quiet tears. "You always find the right words without trying," he shook his head. "No, I just listen. Sometimes that's enough." They sat by the corner table of the bookstore cafe, just like they had years ago, but this time older, calmer, quieter. She told him about her life, her films, her ups and downs, her fears. He listened with that same steady kindness that made her feel seen. Then he told her about his life too. The loneliness of long flights, the peace in simple days, the people he had lost, and the memories that never faded. For a while, they didn't talk. They just sat there as the rain softened outside. Then, out of nowhere, Sandra whispered, "I made a wish today. Keanu looked at her with that thoughtful stillness. And? It just came true, she said with a gentle smile. He looked down, quietly smiling too. In that moment, he didn't need to ask what her wish had been. He already knew, but what neither of them knew was that this meeting, unexpected, simple, pure, was only the beginning of something neither had planned for. Because sometimes, the universe brings two souls together not to rewrite the past, but to remind them that kindness never fades, and love, in its quietest form, always finds its way back. The rain had slowed by nightfall, but the streets still shimmered with reflections of passing cars and dim streetlights. Sandra walked beside Keanu, holding the bouquet of lilies close to her chest. The air smelled of wet earth and old memories. Neither spoke for a while. It was not silence filled with awkwardness. It was the kind of silence that understood its own meaning. As they reached the small parking space near the bookstore, Keanu stopped and looked at her. "Do you still drive that old black car?" he asked, smiling faintly. She laughed softly. "No, I had to let it go. It kept breaking down at the worst times." He nodded. "Yeah, I remember that. We once got stuck in the middle of nowhere because of that car. You pushed it half a mile," she said, smiling wider now. "You didn't even complain." "I was just afraid you'd start directing traffic if I didn't," he replied. His tone playful, but his eyes carried warmth. For a moment, she forgot the years between them. It felt like they had never drifted apart. The familiarity, the quiet understanding, the calm in his voice, it all came rushing back like the first rain after a long drought. "So," she finally said, "how long are you in town?" "A few days, maybe less." "I don't plan much these days," he said, hands in his pockets looking toward the wet road ahead. "Life moves simpler that way," she nodded. "I envy that. I plan everything, and half of it still falls apart." "Maybe that's how it's supposed to be," he said softly. "You can't plan emotions. They just happen." She looked at him quietly, as if that line had landed deeper than he intended. For a few seconds, she wanted to say something about how life had felt emptier without the calm of people like him, but she stopped herself. The rain started again, lighter this time, almost like a whisper. "You want to ride home?" he asked. She hesitated. "Only if you promise not to disappear for another 5 years," he smiled gently. "No promises, but I can try." They got into his car, the familiar scent of rain and old leather wrapping around them. The radio played faintly, an old song they had once heard during a long shoot drive in Arizona. She noticed he still drove the same car, clean and simple, without a trace of luxury. It was exactly how he lived, quiet, humble, unbothered by noise. As they drove, she found herself watching him from the side. There was a peace about him she couldn't explain, a kind of calm that came from surviving too much, and yet still choosing kindness. "You never change," she whispered, half to herself. He turned slightly. "I think we all change. Maybe not in how we act, but in what we carry inside." His voice had that stillness again, the kind that made people listen. "What do you carry inside now?" she asked softly. He paused. "Peace, a little pain, but also gratitude. Every day I wake up, I remind myself to be kind, to myself and others. That's all that really matters." She looked out the window. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said quietly. "But it's worth trying." They reached her home, a modest, quiet place surrounded by trees and the sound of soft rain hitting leaves. When she opened the door, the smell of lavender candles filled the air. Keanu looked around and smiled. "This place feels like you," he said. "Peaceful, but full of stories," she laughed lightly. "Stories, yes. Peaceful, not always." As she placed the lilies in a glass vase, she asked, "You want tea or coffee?" "Tea, no sugar," he replied, sitting on the couch like he'd done it 100 times before. As she moved in the kitchen, his eyes wandered to a shelf filled with photo frames. Most were pictures from movie sets, family gatherings, and small, happy moments. But one photo caught his attention. It was from the set of the lake house. It showed both of them laughing between takes. His smile lingered when he saw it. She came back with 2 mugs of tea and noticed where his eyes were. "That was the day you made everyone laugh for no reason," she said. He chuckled. I just remember the rain wouldn't stop. And you kept saying it was a sign of something. Maybe it was, she said quietly. Rain always brings something new. For a few seconds, they sipped their tea in silence. The rain outside softened again, almost rhythmic. It was strange, how some silences healed more than words ever could. Then Keanu reached into his coat pocket and took out a small folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table, sliding it gently toward her. What's this? She asked. Something I wrote a long time ago. I found it yesterday while cleaning. I didn't plan to give it to you. But tonight, it felt right. She unfolded it carefully. The paper was old, a bit faded, but the words were clear. It wasn't long, just a few lines written in his quiet handwriting. Some people walk beside you for a while, but their kindness stays for a lifetime. Even when silence grows between you, the respect never fades. She stared at it, her eyes softening. You wrote this for me? He nodded slightly. Years ago, after the lake house shoot ended. Why never send it? I didn't know if it would matter, he said simply. She looked at him with quiet emotion. It mattered. More than you think? He smiled faintly but didn't respond. There was a look in his eyes, a mix of nostalgia and calm acceptance. They talked late into the night. About movies, about mistakes, about growing older and finding peace in little things. The world outside went quiet, and the city lights dimmed. As the clock crossed midnight, she said softly, This might be the best birthday I've ever had. Keanu looked at her gently. Sometimes the best moments are the ones we don't plan. But just as the night began to settle into peace, her phone buzzed. She reached for it absent-mindedly, but when she saw the message, her smile faded. Her expression changed, her fingers tightening around the phone. What is it? He asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, she turned the screen toward him. It was a message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. You deserve to know what he never told you. Keanu looked at it, puzzled. Who sent that? I don't know, she said softly. But the timing? It's strange. Outside, the rain started again, this time harder, heavier, as if the night itself had decided that peace couldn't last too long. She placed the phone on the table and looked at him. Keanu, is there something you didn't tell me? He hesitated. For the first time that evening, his calm broke slightly. He looked away, then back at her, eyes unreadable. There are things, he said slowly, that I thought were better left unsaid. She felt her heart tighten. Like what? He took a deep breath, his voice quiet. Things about the past. About that last day we met before everything changed. The air grew still. Even the sound of rain seemed to fade. And in that moment, Sandra realized the night wasn't just about old memories. Something deeper was waiting in the silence. Something she wasn't ready for, yet couldn't walk away from. The night hung heavier than before. The rain outside had turned into a deep, endless rhythm, steady, unbroken, and strangely haunting. Sandra sat still, her eyes fixed on Keanu. He wasn't speaking, but something in his face had changed. That calm gentleness she always recognized was now clouded with something else. Hesitation, maybe even guilt. The clock ticked quietly in the background. The steam from their tea had faded long ago. She broke the silence first. What happened that day, Keanu? He looked down, his fingers lightly tracing the rim of his mug. It was after the last scene of the lake house. Remember how we wrapped late and everyone went out to celebrate? She nodded. You didn't come. You said you were tired. He gave a faint, sad smile. Yeah, but that wasn't the truth. The air inside the room shifted, as if even the walls leaned in to listen. Then why didn't you come? She asked softly. He exhaled slowly, as if searching for courage inside that breath. Because I found out something that night. Something about you. Her brows furrowed. About me? He nodded slowly. Someone had told me you were planning to leave acting, that you were walking away from everything. They said you were tired of the noise, the rumors, the spotlight. I didn't want to believe it. But I saw you that day. Quiet, distant, looking at everyone like you were saying goodbye without words. She was silent, remembering. That time had been hard. She had been struggling, feeling like she was losing herself in fame. Maybe without realizing it, she had looked like someone who was about to disappear. He continued, his tone lower now. So I wrote you a letter that night. I was going to give it to you the next morning before your flight. But when I reached your place, you were already gone. No goodbye, no note. Just gone? Her eyes widened a little. A letter? Yeah, he said. I kept it for years. I don't even know why. Maybe because I hoped one day I'd get to hand it to you myself. She leaned back, her voice trembling slightly. What did it say? He smiled faintly, a quiet sadness in his eyes. It wasn't much. Just that you didn't need to walk away. That the world was loud, but kindness was louder. And that some people, some of us, still believed in you, no matter what the noise said. Sandra's eyes softened. You never told me. You never asked, he said, almost whispering. She smiled gently, but there was a tear forming at the corner of her eye. I thought you were angry. I thought my silence had offended you. He shook his head. Never. I just thought you wanted peace. And the best gift I could give you was leaving you alone. Those words hit her deeper than she expected, because in that moment she realized he hadn't disappeared out of indifference. He had stepped back out of respect. She whispered, You always choose kindness, even when it hurts you. Keanu didn't reply. He just looked at her with that same steady calmness that had always felt like a safe place. But then, her phone buzzed again. The same number. Another message. This time it said, He never told you about the call he got that night. She frowned. What call? Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. What does it say? She handed him the phone. He read the message and went quiet for a few seconds. Then he stood up and walked toward the window, staring out into the rain. Keanu, she said softly. What call? His reflection on the window looked distant, haunted. That night when I was on my way to see you, I got a call from a man who said he was your assistant. He told me you didn't want to see me again. He said you were done with everything connected to your old life. She froze. My assistant? Yeah, he said, his voice breaking slightly. He said you asked him to tell me not to contact you anymore, that it would make moving on easier for you. I believed him. Keanu, she said, almost whispering now. I didn't have an assistant back then. I never said that. The words hung in the air like thunder. Keanu turned slowly, his face pale. Then who was it? She shook her head. I don't know. But whoever it was, they didn't want us to talk again. The realization hit both of them at once. All those years of silence, the distance, the missed birthdays, the unspoken words, it hadn't been fate. It had been a lie. Sandra's voice trembled. Someone made sure we stayed apart. He nodded slowly. And I let them. She walked toward him, her voice soft but heavy. You couldn't have known. He turned toward her, eyes filled with regret. But I should have. I should have trusted you, not a stranger's voice. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. We were younger then. We believed what was easier. Maybe we both needed to lose time to learn what matters. Keanu exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing a little. And what matters now? That we don't waste another second believing silence means goodbye, she said gently. He smiled faintly, but his eyes still carried sadness. You always know what to say? No, she replied. I just know what I missed saying. They stood close now, closer than they had been in years. The sound of rain filled the pauses between their breaths. There was no tension, just a quiet current of old emotion, familiar, yet new. Keanu, she said softly, do you ever think maybe the universe waits for us to be ready? He smiled lightly. Maybe. Or maybe it just keeps testing if we're still listening. She laughed softly through her tears. Then I'm listening now. He nodded. Me too. The night stretched longer. The messages stopped. The rain turned into a soft mist outside, as if the storm had finally decided to rest. But deep down, both knew something wasn't over. That message hadn't been random. Someone still knew things they hadn't told each other. As Sandra walked Keanu to the door, she said, Promise me one thing. What? He asked gently. Don't disappear this time. Not even for peace. He smiled faintly. No promises. but I'll try harder than before." As he left, she watched his car lights fade into the mist. Her house felt quiet again, too quiet. She picked up the old note he had given her earlier and placed it beside the lilies. But just as she turned off the lights, her phone buzzed again. One last message. This time it read, "He was never supposed to find you." She froze. Heart pounding, outside, far down the road, Keanu's car stopped at a red light. His phone vibrated too. Same unknown number, same message. He looked at it, his jaw tightening. The past they thought they had buried was waking up again, and someone, somewhere, still wanted to keep them apart. The next morning began with a quiet fog hanging over Los Angeles. Sunlight tried to push through the gray clouds, but the air still felt heavy, as if the rain from last night had left behind something unseen. Sandra woke early, though she hadn't slept much. Her mind kept circling the same questions, replaying the same images, the unknown message, Keanu's words, the truth about that phone call years ago. She sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at her phone. The last message still glowed on the screen. "He was never supposed to find you." The words echoed in her mind like a whisper she couldn't silence. Who would send that? Who would care enough to hide them from each other all those years ago? Then, almost without realizing it, she scrolled through her contacts until she found Keanu's name. Her thumb hovered over it for a moment, hesitating before pressing call. He picked up almost instantly. "Hey," he said, his voice calm but low, like he hadn't really rested either. "You saw it too?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Same message." "Keanu, this doesn't make sense. Who would want to keep us apart? And why now, after so many years?" There was a pause. "I don't know," he said slowly. "But maybe it's time we find out." She hesitated. "You really think it's connected to that night?" "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe it's someone trying to keep something hidden." "Hidden?" she repeated. "Yeah," he said. "Remember the assistant who called me? What if that person wasn't just pretending? What if they were connected to someone who didn't want us to stay close?" Sandra frowned. "But why? What could anyone gain from that?" Keanu's voice softened. "Not everything people do is about gain, Sandra. Sometimes it's just about control." His words hit something deep inside her. She remembered how, back in those days, their growing closeness had drawn attention. Tabloids, producers, people whispering about whether they were more than friends. There had been pressure, expectations, people trying to shape their choices. "You think someone from the studio?" she asked. He was quiet for a few seconds. "Maybe. Or maybe someone closer." That last line made her chest tighten. "Closer." "Someone who thought they were protecting you," he said gently. "Someone who believed keeping us apart would help you focus or avoid pain." She fell silent. A faint memory stirred. Her old manager, Claire. Back then, Claire had handled everything. Calls, interviews, messages. Sandra had trusted her completely. "Keanu," she said suddenly, "there's someone I need to talk to." He didn't need to ask who. "Want me to come?" "Please," she said softly. "I think I'd feel better if you were there." An hour later, Keanu's car pulled up outside Sandra's house. He stepped out, wearing a simple black jacket, his hair still slightly damp from the mist outside. She met him at the door, her eyes showing a mix of exhaustion and determination. "You ready?" he asked. "As ready as I can be," she replied. They drove through quiet streets, past coffee shops opening for the morning rush, past memories neither spoke about. Sandra watched him drive, calm, focused, the same quiet steadiness that had always grounded her. After a few minutes, she whispered, "You ever think about how life circles back? Like it waits for unfinished stories to finish themselves?" He nodded slightly. "Yeah, maybe this is one of those circles." They reached a small art studio downtown, a place Sandra hadn't visited in years. Claire used to paint here whenever she wanted to escape the chaos of Hollywood. As they stepped inside, the familiar scent of oil paint and dust filled the air. Sunlight broke through the high windows, landing across unfinished canvases leaning against the walls. Claire sat near the window, sketching quietly. When she turned and saw Sandra, her eyes widened in surprise. "Sandra, it's been years!" "Hi, Claire," Sandra said, her voice steady but cold beneath the surface. Can we talk? Claire glanced at Keanu, then back at her. Of course. Is everything okay? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Sandra said, stepping closer. I need to ask you something about the night I left after the lake house wrapped. Claire blinked. That was ages ago. What about it? Did you or anyone working with you call Keanu that night? Claire frowned. No. Why would I? Someone did, Sandra said firmly. They pretended to be my assistant. They told him I didn't want to see him again, that I was done with everything. Claire's face changed slightly, a flicker of something, almost guilt, almost fear. Claire, Sandra said quietly. Was it you? There was a long silence. Then finally Claire sighed. Yes, it was. Sandra's heart dropped. Keanu didn't move, but his expression hardened. Why? Sandra whispered. Because you were breaking, Claire said quickly. You were exhausted, confused. You told me you wanted space from everything and everyone. You said you wanted silence. I thought I was helping you. I thought keeping him away would give you peace. You lied to him, Sandra said, her voice trembling. You took that choice from both of us. I know, Claire said, her eyes soft with regret. And I'm sorry, but you have to understand. You were falling apart. I thought... You thought wrong, Keanu interrupted quietly, his voice calm but sharp. You don't get to decide how someone heals. Claire looked down, tears forming in her eyes. I didn't mean to hurt either of you. The silence stretched. Sandra's breathing was slow but shaky. She felt anger, sadness, and relief all mixing together inside her. You changed everything, she whispered. For years I thought he walked away. Claire wiped her tears. And I thought I was protecting you. Keanu took a slow breath and stepped closer. Sometimes protection isn't silence. It's honesty. Claire nodded faintly, unable to look him in the eye. Sandra turned toward the window. The light was brighter now, but it didn't feel warm. You know what hurts the most? She said softly. You made me believe silence was peace, but it was loneliness. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She didn't move for a moment, then slowly turned to him, her eyes soft and tired. We can't change what happened, he said quietly, but maybe we can stop letting it own us. She nodded. Maybe this was meant to come out now. Maybe this was the universe's way of ending the silence. But just as they were about to leave, Claire said something that made them both stop. There's something else, she said. The message last night. It wasn't me. Sandra turned. What? Claire shook her head quickly. I haven't spoken to you in years. I didn't even know he was in town. But whoever's sending those messages, they knew about that call. They knew the exact words. That means they were listening even then. Keanu's expression darkened. Listening? Someone was keeping track of you two, Claire said. I don't know who, but they knew more than just what I told him. Someone else was involved. The air turned heavy again, Sandra whispered. So it wasn't just you, Claire nodded. No, and if they're sending those messages now, it means they're still watching. Keanu looked at Sandra, his voice steady but serious. Then we find out who they are. No more silence. No more secrets. Sandra nodded slowly, her heart racing. Together, and as they walked out of the studio, the sunlight finally broke through the clouds, sharp, bright, and clear, cutting through the mist like a promise. Neither of them noticed the dark car parked across the street. Inside, a phone screen glowed quietly. A message appeared, typed by unseen hands. They're getting close. Stop them before he tells her the rest. The next day began not with sunlight, but with unease. Sandra woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. For a second, she thought it was another message from that same unknown number. Her heart pounded as she reached for it. But this time it was a call. She hesitated before answering. Hello? Sandra? Keanu's voice came through, calm but tight. Keanu! What's wrong? We need to meet, he said. Now. His tone made her sit up immediately. Where? The park near Mulholland. You'll see me. The line went dead. She didn't waste time. She threw on a coat, grabbed her keys, and drove through the cold morning haze. Her thoughts raced. After everything that happened with Claire, she had finally begun to feel clarity. But the way Keanu sounded on the phone reminded her that peace never lasted long in their story. When she arrived at the park, she spotted him under an oak tree, his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the fog-covered hills. She could tell from his face something new had happened. "What is it?" she asked as she reached him. He turned, his expression unreadable. "Someone left this at my door this morning." He handed her a small envelope, the paper slightly damp from dew. No name, no address, just her initials in faint handwriting, SB. Her stomach tightened. "Who would open it?" he said softly. She unfolded the envelope carefully. Inside was a photograph. It was old, grainy, black and white. But the image was unmistakable. It was the two of them, sitting together on the set of the lake house. It wasn't from any official shoot. It was from a private moment, her head resting lightly on his shoulder while they laughed at something off camera. And at the bottom of the photo, written in dark ink, were the words, "Not everything you remember is true." Her hand shook slightly. "Keanu, what does this mean?" He shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever's behind this, whoever's sending those messages, has access to things only we could have known." "So they've been watching for years?" She whispered. "Looks like it," he said. "And they're trying to change the story we remember." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why us, Keanu? Why now?" He looked off toward the mist. "Maybe because the truth's about to surface. Maybe they're afraid of what we'll find." A moment passed between them. A heavy, wordless understanding. "We can't let them control this anymore," she said firmly. "No more running," he nodded. "Then we start where it all began." By afternoon, they were driving toward an old film warehouse that once stored props and behind-the-scenes material from the lake house. The studio had closed years ago, but some of the archives were rumored to still exist there. As they entered the quiet building, the air was thick with dust and echoes of the past. Sunlight slipped through broken windows, painting lines across shelves stacked with forgotten reels, boxes, and scripts. "This place feels frozen in time," Sandra said quietly. Keanu walked ahead, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. "Sometimes the past doesn't die," he murmured. "It just waits." They searched for hours, moving through rows of old boxes labeled with dates and names. Most were ordinary, set schedules, prop lists, costume notes. But near the back, Sandra found one box that had her name written in faded marker. "Keanu!" she called. He walked over, kneeling beside her. Together, they opened it. Inside were several photographs, behind-the-scenes footage tapes, and a stack of letters. Most of the letters were fan mail, but near the bottom, sealed in a separate envelope, was a letter with both their names written in the same neat handwriting. She opened it slowly. The first line read, "If you're reading this, you finally found what they wanted you to forget." Sandra's eyes widened. Keanu leaned closer. The letter continued. "Years ago, during the final weeks of filming, something happened that was never meant to reach you. There were people who believed your connection was becoming a distraction, something they couldn't control. They intervened. Calls were made, messages faked, words twisted. The goal was simple, to make you forget what really happened that last night." Her hands trembled slightly. "Keanu, this can't be real." He looked at her. "Keep reading. You were never meant to leave that night. The real message he sent never reached you, and the one you received wasn't from him." She froze. "What message?" He frowned. "I never sent any message," she swallowed. "Yes, you did. I got one the night before I left. It said, 'You deserve better. Goodbye.' I thought it was from you." Keanu shook his head slowly. "I never sent that, never." Her heart pounded. "Then who did?" They both went silent. The sound of dripping water echoed through the warehouse. "This was planned," Keanu said finally. "Someone wanted us apart, badly enough to fake both sides." She sat down slowly, the letter still in her trembling hands. "And they're still out there." He nodded, eyes darkening. "And they're watching again." Outside, the sky had turned gold with evening light. Sandra sat on a low wall, the letter beside her staring into the distance. "It's strange," she said softly. For years, I thought the worst thing was losing connection, but now I realize what hurts more. It's realizing we were manipulated into believing the wrong story. Keanu sat beside her, quiet for a moment before saying, "But we're not in their story anymore." "Not now. We write the rest ourselves." She smiled faintly. "You always find the right words." He looked at her gently. "Maybe it's not about the right words. Maybe it's about finally saying them at the right time." She turned toward him, her eyes filled with warmth and pain all at once. "Then say it, Keanu." "Whatever you never said that night." He hesitated, then spoke softly. "I never wanted to let you go. I thought silence was kindness. But it wasn't. It was fear. I was afraid of losing something I didn't even have the courage to ask for." Her eyes glistened. "And what was that?" "You," he said simply. The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She just reached for his hand, their fingers meeting softly, like something fragile being rediscovered. But the peace didn't last. Keanu's phone buzzed again. Another unknown message. He looked down, his jaw tightening as he read aloud. "Truth costs more than you think." "Stop digging," he showed it to Sandra. Her face went pale. "They're not done," she whispered. Keanu stood up slowly. "Then neither are we." She followed his gaze toward the setting sun, where the golden light faded into darker clouds. What they didn't see was the silhouette standing at the edge of the warehouse's second-floor window, watching them through the broken glass. Phone in hand, a faint voice message was being recorded, ending with quiet words. "They found the letter. Prepare for the next step." The next morning came quietly, but it didn't bring calm. Los Angeles was covered in pale fog, the kind that makes sounds softer and shadows longer. Sandra hadn't slept again. She sat by her window, replaying the last message Keanu received. "Truth costs more than you think." Stop digging. She wanted to stop. She wanted to return to peace, but she couldn't, not now. Not after everything they had uncovered. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Keanu. "You awake?" "Been awake," she said softly. "Meet me," he said. "Same place as yesterday. The warehouse." Something in his tone made her uneasy. When she arrived, the air inside the warehouse was cold and still. Keanu was already there, standing near the old film reels, his back to her. He was holding something in his hand. "You got here fast," he said without turning. "You sound different," she said. "What's going on?" He finally faced her, his expression serious but calm. In his hand was a small audio recorder. "I found this in the box last night after you left," he said. It was wrapped in an old production note. "I listened to it this morning." She frowned. "What's on it?" He pressed play. A soft, static sound filled the room, then a voice. Female, older, calm. It was Claire's voice. "If you ever hear this, it means I couldn't stop what they started. You were never supposed to know. They didn't want your connection on that set. It threatened plans bigger than either of you. I took the blame because I thought it would end there. But they never stopped. They watched both of you, even after you left. They still are. Please, be careful." The recording clicked off. Silence followed. Sandra's breath caught. "Claire knew," she whispered. "She knew all along." Keanu nodded. "And she tried to protect us. Even now. But who are they?" she asked. "Who's behind all this?" He sighed softly. "I don't think it matters anymore. What matters is that they didn't win. We're here. We found the truth." She looked at him, trying to calm the storm in her chest. But what if they're still watching? He smiled faintly, that calm smile she had always known. "Then let them watch something they can't control. Kindness, peace, forgiveness." Her eyes softened. "You make it sound simple." "It is," he said. "They took years from us, but not our choice to heal." She sat beside him on a dusty old crate. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "how life might have been if none of this happened?" He looked at her thoughtfully. "Sometimes. But then I realize, maybe we had to go through all that distance to understand what really matters." "And what's that?" she asked. "Being here now," he said simply. "Not looking back. Not chasing what-ifs." For a moment, the silence between them was different. No tension, no weight, just warmth. Sunlight broke through the cracks in the roof, spilling golden light over the dusty floor. She smiled faintly. "You always find light in dark places." He laughed softly. "You taught me that." They walked out together, leaving the warehouse behind. Neither spoke as they stepped into the fresh air, but both felt something lift off their shoulders, a quiet kind of peace that doesn't come from answers, but from acceptance. A week later, Sandra was back at her favorite cafe, the same one where the story had started, where she had made that quiet birthday wish. She was reading a script, sipping coffee, when a familiar hand gently placed a paper cup beside her. "You still drink the same thing," said Keanu's voice. She looked up, smiling. "And you still remember." He sat across from her, casual and calm. "I keep promises," he said. "No," she said softly. "You keep hearts safe," he chuckled lightly. "That too." For a while, they talked about everything except the past. It wasn't needed anymore. There was laughter again, real and unforced. Then, as the rain began to fall outside, just like that first day, Keanu reached into his pocket and handed her a small folded note. She opened it. It was written in his careful handwriting, simple and quiet. The unseen gestures matter most. The world sees fame, lights, and noise, but real connection lives in silence, in kindness, in the spaces between words. Her eyes softened as she looked up. "You never change," she whispered. He smiled. "Maybe I finally did. In the right way." They sat there in peaceful silence, watching the rain. Two souls who had finally closed a circle that had remained open for years. And as she looked out the window, she realized something beautiful. Her wish had come true. Not because he showed up again, not because the truth was found, but because kindness had found its way back into her life. Later that evening, after Keanu left, Sandra walked home through the rain. Her phone buzzed once more. One last message from the unknown number appeared on her screen, but this time, it wasn't a threat. It simply said, "The story is complete. Let peace stay." She stared at it for a long time, then smiled quietly. Maybe whoever had started it all had finally let go too. She turned off her phone, looked up at the sky, and whispered softly, "Thank you." And somewhere far away, as the city lights shimmered through the rain, Keanu stood at his window looking out, a faint smile on his face. For the first time in years, there was no weight in his eyes, only stillness. Sometimes the greatest gestures are never seen by the world. Sometimes they live quietly, in hearts that choose peace over pain, forgiveness over blame, and kindness over everything else. And in that unseen gesture, their story finally rested, complete, gentle, and forever true.